We're just a few short days away from the Detroit Auto Show, and joining me to talk about the top trends and some potential highlights is Stifel's automotive analyst, James Albertine, joining me from Washington, D.C. Good to see you, Jamie. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So what do you see as some of the big themes coming out of the show next week?
Yeah, there's really three key themes that we've highlighted in our preview note. The first is infotainment and safety-related technology. The second on alternative powertrains and sort of an emphasis on fuel efficiency. And then the third will be more of a prevalence of light weighting across vehicle models, but really with the highlight being what we think is going to be the launch of the new F-150 from Ford. So those are the three that we're focused on. Within the technology side, though, I think there's really two subdivisions that I would draw your line of sight to. The first being really technologies that were introduced in 2011 and 2012, a wider proliferation across all entry levels of price points for vehicles. And then second, some of the newer technologies like driverless technologies and safety-related interventional technologies will be more focused on the generally the higher end, the luxury products that are on display there.
Since you brought up the F-150, let me ask you about that. Is there going to be any
Sure.
sort of acceptance problem for a lighter F-150?
I think there's some speculation that the core consumer is going to raise their hand and question whether or not that impacts the durability of the vehicle. But you know, aluminum is not a new phenomenon across the auto industry, and it's been proven to be just as, if not more, resilient and more durable to some degree, and then also more malleable, quite frankly. So from a repair standpoint, you know, it's a little bit more of a flexible metal. So long story short, I don't think it's going to have any long-term impacts. I think it's just fodder for sort of, you know, the Detroit Auto Show speculation crowd.
It does appear there are a lot of automakers pushing high-performance vehicles this year over some of those
Sure.
environmentally friendly or economic vehicles. Why have we seen that shift in focus, and is it a lasting one?
Yeah, look, I think even the high-performance vehicles are extremely fuel efficient relative to their predecessors. I mean, most manufacturers are going to downsize engine sizes and seek to turbocharge and supercharge to enhance the performance of a smaller displacement engine. It's really not only a luxury phenomenon. I think it's across the board. Consumers are telling manufacturers that they don't want to sacrifice performance, you know, even if they do focus on fuel efficiency. So I think it's a long-term trend. And you know, it's been the way of the industry. How can we make things that we have go faster? That's been the trend for 100 years.
Who's winning on the infotainment side as far as the coolest new
Sure.
stuff?
Yeah, well, the Consumer Electronics Show this week highlighted a bunch of different manufacturers. Quite frankly, there were booths from Mercedes-Benz, Ford, Audi, you know, and I think, quite frankly, Ford and Mercedes-Benz appeared to have the biggest presence at CES as far as we were concerned. So we expect, particularly on the safety side, Ford's going to have, I think, the most to show at the Detroit Auto Show next week, the most on display. From a infotainment and sort of seamless integration with mobile products side, you know, watch out for Ford. I think Ford's really taking it straight to the Japanese manufacturers. They've perennially been the powerhouses in that regard. So stand clear. I think Ford's going to have a lot to show next week.
How about Tesla? That's a stock you currently rate a hold. What's at stake for Tesla? What do they
Sure.
have to prove?
Yeah, look, I think Tesla has done a phenomenal job displaying the appetite among higher-end consumers for $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 electric vehicles. I think what they have to prove is that that same brand image and that penetration rate, the successful increase in penetration rate that they're seeking at lower price points is possible. It stands to reason that below $50,000, there aren't really any success stories in the EV side. So that's the biggest hurdle as we see it going forward.
Are electric vehicles as important if we're not really seeing a pressure with energy prices rising?
Look, I think the jury's still out as it relates to the powertrain of choice for the 21st century. Personally, I think there's sort of a sailboat approach from most manufacturers that dedicate sort of the typical 50 to 100 mile range on electric batteries, so just enough to kind of get you back and forth to your office and your daily commute, but then supplemented by either a diesel or a gasoline power plant to extend the range and make the vehicle, enhance the utility of the vehicle, so you're not sacrificing sort of long-term travel as a result. Personally, I think that's going to be the next stage. I think Tesla might be a little bit ahead of its time with respect to EV only at this point.
What automaker or company do you expect is going to be the most buzzworthy out of this show?
That's a great question. I mean, I think there's really an emphasis on content. With respect to product, I think it's hard to look past the F-150. It's the best-selling vehicle by far in the United States and has been for something like 33 or 34 years. So I think that's really going to be the main focus. Outside of that, quite frankly, Lincoln and their MKC crossover utility, they're going to have a production version of that. We expect a production version of the Tesla Model X crossover utility, which probably will garner some media attention and focus. And then it's a sort of a hodgepodge, but that's how I would prioritize it probably at this point.
Got to ask you about GM, which is going to have a new CEO here
Sure.
as the show continues. You haven't mentioned any GM products yet. Will GM be overshadowed by Ford?
Well, I think last year was really more about GM, and they were engaging in their product refresh cycle in a little bit more more earnestly than their peers. So the baton has really passed on now to Ford. I think this year will be more about Ford launches. In fact, in December we were at an analyst meeting that Ford held in New York, and they laid out plans for 16 new vehicle launches in North America alone next year. So I think the focus again will be more on the Ford side in the coming year, but certainly GM will have on display their new smaller size pickup, the Canyon, and quite frankly, we always like to see the new updated larger SUVs. They have dominant market share in that position. So seeing the new Escalade and the new Yukon and new Suburban and Tahoe in person is going to also probably have a lot of attention.
And finally, Jamie, what are your expectations for sales in 2014 for the industry?
Sure.
And what's the biggest hurdle or worry for the industry this year?
Yeah, I think credit rates rising is probably the biggest concern. If you look back historically, a rising credit environment is typically not a good thing for auto sales. I think, though, however, given the stage of the recovery that we're in, there's quite a lot of pent-up demand as most consumers, based on our proprietary survey work, have been extending the life of their vehicles and, quite frankly, have had very mild weather, so vehicles haven't been breaking as frequently. With the storms that we've seen already this winter, it stands to reason you're going to see more breakage next year and more need-based demand. That's really what underpins our 4% market growth estimate year on year to a 16.25 million SAR for 2014.
James Albertine from Stifel, thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'm Rhonda Schaffler. This is Reuters.